The Nevada sun beat down on the testing range as Lance Strickland adjusted the targeting scope on the latest prototype drone. Sweat dripped from his forehead despite the early morning hour. 3 weeks of field tests had pushed every system to its limits, and today would determine if the counter-surveillance tech could withstand real combat conditions. System status report. Lance called out to his technical team scattered across the range. "All green, sir," came the response from his lead technician, Sergeant Morris. Optical systems functioning at 98% efficiency. Power consumption within acceptable parameters. Battery life projecting 4 hours of continuous operation. Lance nodded. At 40, he had spent 15 years perfecting military-grade defense equipment at Joint Base Lewis McChord. His methodical approach had earned him respect throughout the defense community. Every bolt, every circuit, every line of code had to be perfect. Lives depended on it. The drone hummed to life, its cameras rotating with mechanical precision. Lance watched the test monitors as the unit performed reconnaissance sweeps. The data streams looked clean. The targeting algorithms functioned without error. Heat signatures appeared as colored shapes on his screen, distance calculations updated in real time, and the threat assessment protocols responded to simulated enemy movements. Target acquisition speed. Lance asked. 2.3 seconds from detection to lock. Morris replied. "That's our best time yet. Run the interference protocol." Morris activated electronic countermeasures designed to simulate enemy jamming attempts. The drone's systems adapted automatically, switching between frequencies and maintaining target locks despite the electronic noise. "Outstanding," Lance muttered. Another successful iteration that would save lives in the field. His encrypted phone vibrated against his hip. Lance glanced at the screen, expecting a routine check-in from base command. Instead, he saw Rena's name. His wife rarely called during classified operations, and never this early in the morning. "Hold position," he told his team. "Run diagnostics on the backup systems. I want full reports on all components." "Copy that, sir." Lance walked away from the group, seeking privacy behind a concrete barrier wall. The structure provided shade and blocked the view from his team. He opened the message and tapped play on the video file. The image was shaky, clearly shot from a phone. Lance recognized his living room immediately, the brown leather couch Rena had insisted on buying, the coffee table with scratches from Cole's toy cars, the family photos on the mantle that now seemed like artifact from a different life. Rena stood in the background, her arms crossed over her chest. She wore the red blouse he had bought her for their anniversary last year. Her expression was cold, calculating. In the center of the frame, Vince Calder grabbed Cole by the collar of his blue school shirt. "Your brat ruined my day." Vince's voice cracked through the phone's speaker, distorted by anger and cheap audio quality that Lance's son looked small in Vince's grip, his feet barely touching the ground. Cole's analytical nature, so much like his father's, had apparently offended the ex-bouncer somehow. The boy's face showed confusion more than fear. He was trying to understand what he had done wrong. "He needs to learn his value," Rena said. Her voice carried an icy malice Lance had never heard before, each word pronounced with deliberate cruelty. Vince yanked Cole toward the front door. Through the window, Lance could see rain pounding against the glass. The storm outside looked violent, the kind that turned streets into rivers and knocked down power lines. "Get out there and think about what you did," Vince shoved Cole through the door. The boy stumbled, caught himself on the porch railing, then disappeared from the camera's view. Lance could hear the door slam, then the sound of Cole crying in the distance. The video ended abruptly. Lance stared at the black screen. His hands remained steady, his breathing controlled. Years of military training had taught him to process information before reacting. But inside his mind, tactical assessments began forming with mechanical precision. Target identified. Vince Calder, age 37, immediate threat to primary asset. Secondary target, Rena Strickland, accomplice in threat, possible hostile intelligence. Primary asset, Cole Strickland, age 8, requires immediate extraction and protection. Mission objective, neutralize threats, secure asset, eliminate future risk. Operational constraints, maintain legal framework, avoid detection, ensure permanent solution. Sir, his technician's voice carried across the range. We're ready for the next test sequence. Lance pocketed his phone and walked back to his team. Cancel remaining tests. Pack everything. We're heading back to base. Sir, we have 2 more days scheduled. The drone still needs stress testing under extreme weather conditions. Pack it up. Lance's voice carried the tone that ended discussions. Now, that's a direct order. Morris and the other technicians immediately began shutting down equipment. They had worked with Lance long enough to recognize when something serious was happening. Should we file the preliminary report, sir? Morris asked while disconnecting cables. I'll handle all reports personally. Focus on packing. I want everything secured and loaded within 30 minutes. Lance walked to his command vehicle and pulled out his secure satellite phone. He dialed his commanding officer's direct line. Colonel Hayes speaking. Sir, Lance Strickland. I need emergency family leave effective immediately. What's the situation, Lance? Child welfare emergency. My son is in danger. How long do you need? Unknown at this time. Potentially extended. Approved. Take care of your family. The project can wait. Thank you, sir. Lance ended the call and immediately dialed his lawyer's office. Jennifer Walsh specialized in military family legal issues, and Lance had used her services during his separation from Rena. Walsh Law Office, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, it's Lance Strickland. I need an emergency consultation today. What's the nature of the emergency? Child abuse. I have video evidence. I need custody protection immediately. How soon can you get to my office? I'm driving from Nevada. I'll be there by midnight. I'll wait for you. Bring everything you have. Lance drove through the night, his truck eating up highway miles between Nevada and Washington. He had loaded his gear in record time, leaving his team to finish packing the remaining equipment. The speedometer held steady at 85 miles per hour, just fast enough to make good time without attracting police attention. The video played in his mind on repeat. Every detail burned into his memory with photographic precision. Vince's grip on Cole's collar right hand, thumb positioned over the boy's collarbone, applying enough pressure to lift Cole's feet off the ground. The way Rena stood, watching arms crossed, weight shifted to her left foot, facial expression showing satisfaction rather than concern. The storm outside, heavy rain, wind strong enough to bend tree branches, temperature probably in the low 40s. Lance had met Vince Calder 6 months ago when Rena started bringing him around the house. 37 years old, unemployed since being fired from his bouncer job for excessive force, and carrying the kind of aggressive energy that came from too many bar fights and too few victories in life. Rena claimed he was helping with repairs around the house, but Lance had never seen evidence of any actual work being done. His marriage to Rena had been deteriorating for 3 years. She craved excitement and material things that his military salary couldn't always provide. Her impulsive nature clashed with his methodical approach to everything from finances to vacation planning. They had become strangers, sharing a house and a son, communicating through text messages and brief conversations about scheduling. But Cole was different. Cole mattered more than anything else in Lance's life. The boy had inherited Lance's analytical mind and attention to detail. At 8 years old, Cole could explain the basic principles of aerodynamics and calculate math problems that challenged kids twice his age. He asked thoughtful questions about everything from military strategy to mechanical engineering. Lance saw unlimited potential in his son, the kind of intellect that could solve complex problems and make the world better. Lance's phone rang through the truck speakers. Rena's name appeared on the dashboard display. "Where are you?" she asked when he answered. Her voice sounded casual, almost bored. "Driving home. Got your message." "What message?" Her voice carried forced innocence, the tone she used when pretending not to understand something obvious. The video, Rena. Silence stretched between them for several seconds. Lance could hear background noise, television, maybe music from another room. "Oh, that. Look, Vince was just trying to teach Cole some discipline. The boy needs structure when you're not around. You sent me a video of him pushing our son into a storm. It wasn't that bad. Kids need to learn consequences for their actions." Cole was being disrespectful. Define disrespectful. He was asking inappropriate questions about Vince's personal life, making judgments about adult situations he doesn't understand. Lance processed this information. Cole's analytical nature had led him to question Vince's behavior or lifestyle. The man had responded with violence. What exactly did Cole say? He asked why Vince doesn't have a job like you do. He said it was weird for adults to stay home all day watching television, and that justified physical violence. It justified teaching him to mind his own business. You're not here to handle discipline, so I have to make decisions about what's appropriate. Lance ended the call without another word. He pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the truck to 90 miles per hour. Police cars lined the street when Lance pulled into his Tacoma neighborhood. Red and blue lights reflected off wet pavement from the earlier storm, creating a surreal light show across the residential block. Lance parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows between streetlights. Officer Martinez stood on the front porch talking to Rena. Lance recognized him from community events at the Base Good Cop, thorough in his reports, fair in his dealings with military families. His partner, Officer Chun, was photographing the front door and surrounding area. Mrs. Strickland, we found your son under the Henderson's deck 3 houses down. He was soaked and shivering. The neighbors called us when they heard crying. I told you, Officer Martinez. He ran outside during a tantrum. Kids do that when they don't get their way. Ma'am, he says he was pushed out into the storm by your boyfriend. He's 8 years old. He doesn't understand what happened. He probably slipped on the wet porch and got scared. Lance circled around to the backyard, using his military training to move silently through the shadows. Through the kitchen window, he could see Vince sitting at the table, a beer in his hand and what looked like painkillers on the counter. The man looked relaxed, almost amused by the situation outside, that Vince's posture showed no concern or stress. He was treating the police investigation like entertainment, occasionally glancing toward the front door and smirking. Lance memorized every detail of the scene for future reference. Lance moved to the front yard and approached the officers, stepping into the light with his hands visible. Lance Strickland, he identified himself. Cole's father. Officer Martinez turned. Mr. Strickland, we were trying to reach you. Your phone went straight to voicemail. I drove back from Nevada as soon as I heard. Where's my son? EMTs checked him over in the ambulance. He's fine physically, just cold and scared. He's inside with Officer Chun, giving his statement. Lance looked at Rena. Her makeup was perfect despite the late hour and the supposed crisis with their son. Her clothes showed no signs of concern or stress, no wrinkled fabric from rushing around, no evidence that she had been outside in the storm looking for Cole. The situation appears to be a domestic misunderstanding, Martinez continued. We have conflicting stories from the adults present. Your son says he was pushed outside, but there's no physical evidence of assault. Without more substantial proof, we can only issue a warning about proper child supervision. What did my son tell you exactly? Lance asked. He said he asked Mr. Calder a question about employment, and Mr. Calder became angry. According to your son, Mr. Calder grabbed him and pushed him outside, telling him to think about being more respectful. And what does Mr. Calder say happened? Mr. Calder claims your son was having a tantrum and ran outside on his own. He says he tried to stop the boy, but couldn't catch him in time. Lance nodded slowly. I understand the difficulty in determining the truth based on verbal statements alone, officers. Dad! Cole's voice came from the front door. He ran to Lance, who knelt and wrapped his arms around the boy. You okay, buddy? Vince got mad because I asked him why he doesn't have a job like you do. I didn't mean to make him angry. I was just curious about how adults make money when they don't work. Lance felt Cole's damp clothes and hair. The boy's analytical mind, the trait Lance was most proud of, had triggered this attack. Cole had simply applied logic to an adult situation and asked a reasonable question. We'll talk about everything at home, Lance said quietly. Officer Martinez approached them. Mr. Strickland, I'm documenting everything that happened tonight. The neighbor who found your son provided a written statement. We have photographs of Cole's condition when we arrived. If there are any further incidents involving your son's welfare, there won't be, Lance replied. His voice remained even controlled, but his mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and options. We strongly recommend family counseling, Martinez added. and perhaps Mr. Calder should consider finding alternative living arrangements until family dynamics improve. Vince appeared in the doorway. "Officer, I've been trying to help this family deal with discipline issues. The kid needs structure, and his father is never around to provide it." "Sir, that's not your decision to make," Martinez replied firmly. "Someone has to teach him respect for adults. Mr. Calder, I suggest you step back inside while we finish our investigation." Rena grabbed Vince's arm. "Come on, let them handle this." The officers left after completing their paperwork. Rena and Vince went inside without another word. Lance loaded Cole into his truck along with some clothes and toys from the boys' room. "Are we going to your apartment?" Cole asked as they drove away. Lance had maintained a small apartment near the base since the separation started. It was Spartan but clean, with a second bedroom he had prepared for Cole's visits. "For tonight. Tomorrow we figure out the rest." "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." Vince said, "I'm not smart enough to understand adult things. But I understand more than he thinks I do." Lance looked at his son in the rearview mirror. Cole's eyes showed intelligence beyond his years, the same analytical capability that Lance valued in his own work. "I know you do, Cole. That's exactly what I'm counting on. Are you going to make sure Vince can't hurt me again?" Lance met his son's eyes in the mirror. "Yes, I'm going to make sure of that." The cabin sat 15 miles into the Olympic National Forest, accessible only by a gravel road that wound through dense trees. Cass Holbrook had inherited the property from her grandfather and converted it into a survival training facility. Solar panels powered basic electricity, a well provided water, and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Off-grid, secure, and completely private, Lance parked next to a modified Jeep Wrangler and a black pickup truck. His team had arrived first, which meant they had already swept the area for security and established communication protocols. Cass opened the door before he could knock. At 42, she carried herself with the confident posture of someone who had faced down insurgents in Kandahar and lived to teach wilderness survival to weekend warriors. Her gray eyes assessed Lance's condition immediately. "You look like hell, Strickland. 3 days without sleep will do that. Coffee's hot." Hector's already set up in the back room. Lance followed her through the main cabin to a smaller room that Cass used for planning training exercises. The space was equipped with military-grade communication equipment, detailed topographical maps of the region, and secure storage for weapons and sensitive materials. Hector Price sat at a folding table, 3 laptops open in front of him. Cables snaked between devices, and portable hard drives hummed quietly. External monitors displayed encrypted data streams and surveillance footage from multiple sources. "Lance." Hector looked up from his screens. At 46, he moved with the quiet precision of someone who had spent a decade in Navy cyber warfare before transitioning to private consulting. "I pulled the video file from your phone and ran preliminary analysis. Want to see what we're working with?" Lance sat down and accepted a cup of coffee from Cass. The brew was strong enough to wake the dead, exactly what he needed. "Show me everything." Hector turned one of the laptops toward Lance. The video played in high definition, enhanced and stabilized using professional software. Every detail was now crystal clear. Vince's aggressive grab, the pressure points he used on Cole's collar, Rena's cold expression as she watched the abuse unfold. "Metadata confirms authenticity," Hector said, pulling up technical specifications. Timestamp shows the recording was made at 14:27 hours local time. Device information indicates it was shot on Rena's iPhone. GPS coordinates place it at your home address. This will hold up in any court. Audio quality, excellent. I've isolated each voice and enhanced the clarity. Every word is clearly audible, including background sounds that establish the environmental conditions. Cass pulled up a chair and joined them at the table. "What's the operational objective?" Lance looked at his 2 oldest friends. Cass had saved his life twice in Afghanistan when their convoy hit improvised explosive devices. Hector had provided intelligence that prevented 3 separate ambushes during their deployment. Trust wasn't a question among the 3 of them. "I want them destroyed," Lance said without hesitation. "Both of them. Completely. Legally. Permanently." "Define destroyed," Hector said, his fingers already moving across a keyboard to open new files. "Prison time. Criminal records. Rena loses all parental rights forever. Vince disappears from our lives permanently with no possibility of return. Cass leaned back in her chair. That's a tall order. What's our timeline? However long it takes. But I want Cole protected first immediately. Emergency custody filing, Hector suggested. This video plus the police report should be enough for a temporary order. I can have legal documentation prepared within hours. Then we build the comprehensive case, Lance continued. Find everything. Drug use, financial crimes, violence, anything that puts them away for years, not months. You sure about this path? Cass asked. Once we start, there's no backing down. This becomes a full commitment with all the risks that entails. Lance thought about Cole's damp clothes, his son's analytical question that had triggered Vince's rage, the fear in the boy's eyes when Lance found him shivering under a stranger's deck. I'm sure. They threatened my son. They made him vulnerable. That's unforgivable. Hector's fingers moved across his keyboard. I'll start with comprehensive background checks on both targets. Financial records, criminal history, known associates, social media activity, employment records, everything digital. I'll handle physical surveillance, Cass offered. Figure out their routines, identify weak points, document behavioral patterns. And I'll coordinate legal strategy while managing operational security, Lance said. We do this clean, methodical, with no traces back to us. Cass raised her coffee cup. Operation Cold Justice is a go. 2 weeks later, Lance sat in his lawyer's office reviewing the custody paperwork. Jennifer Walsh had handled military family legal issues for 8 years, specializing in cases where deployment schedules complicated custody arrangements. She understood the stakes and the unique challenges military families faced. The enhanced video is powerful evidence, she said, organizing documents across her desk in neat piles. Combined with the police report and the pediatrician's examination, we have a solid foundation for emergency custody. Dr. Patricia Kim's medical report documented bruises on Cole's arms consistent with being grabbed forcefully. The patterns matched the grip positions visible in the video. More importantly, the boy had mentioned other incidents during the examination times when Vince had taught him lessons while Lance was at work or away on assignment. How long before we can file? Lance asked. Court opens Monday morning. I'll have the emergency custody petition ready to submit first thing. The evidence package includes the enhanced video, police documentation, medical records, and witness statements from the neighbors who found Cole. Lance's phone buzzed with a text from Hector. Package delivered. Check your secure email. I need to make a call, Lance told his lawyer. Outside the office building, Lance opened Hector's encrypted email on his phone. Financial records, phone logs, and surveillance photos filled his screen. Hector had been thorough, using contacts in the intelligence community to access databases not available to civilian investigators. Vince Calder's bank account showed erratic deposits from multiple sources, cash transactions that didn't match any legitimate employment. His spending patterns included frequent purchases at known drug corners and regular payments to gambling establishments that operated outside legal frameworks. More interesting were the photos Cass had captured during her surveillance operation. Vince meeting with known dealers in parking lots. Money changing hands in quantities that suggested distribution rather than personal use. Drug packages being transferred between vehicles. But the most damaging evidence was in the final folder. Video footage from hidden cameras Lance had installed around Rena's house. Professional-grade surveillance equipment, military specification, designed to operate undetected for extended periods. The footage showed Vince slapping Rena during an argument about money. Vince threatening a neighbor over a parking dispute, using language that included specific threats of physical violence. Most importantly, video of Vince counting cash while Rena recorded transactions in a notebook, clearly documenting some kind of financial operation. Lance called Cass. How did you get those camera angles inside the house? Turns out your wife's boyfriend is predictable. Same hangouts, same schedule, same routine every day. I've been documenting everything for 10 days. Plus, I may have gained access to the house while they were both out. Any evidence of violence toward Cole? Not while I was watching. but I got him threatening other kids at the park when they wouldn't share playground equipment. Parents complained to security, and there's an incident report on file. Lance filed that information away. Another piece of the expanding puzzle. What's next? Cass asked. We file for custody Monday. Then we start the real operation. Judge Harrison reviewed the custody petition for 3 minutes before looking up at Lance and Jennifer. The courtroom was nearly empty except for a court reporter and a bailiff. Morning light streamed through tall windows, creating patterns on the polished wooden floor. Mr. Strickland, this video evidence is deeply concerning. Yes, Your Honor. And you've been living separately from your wife since this incident. Yes, Your Honor. I've maintained an apartment near my base for the past 2 months. My son has been staying with me since the night of the incident. Mrs. Strickland, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Rena's public defender, a young man who had received the case that morning, shuffled through papers with obvious unfamiliarity. Your Honor, my client denies any wrongdoing. The video lacks context. The child was disciplined for inappropriate behavior, and the discipline was reasonable under the circumstances. By being pushed into a storm, Judge Harrison's tone carried clear disapproval. The discipline was appropriate given the child's disrespectful attitude toward adults in the household. Your Honor, Jennifer interrupted, we have additional evidence of ongoing threats to the child's safety. She submitted Dr. Kim's medical report and Officer Martinez's police documentation, along with photographs of Cole's injuries and signed statement from the neighbors who had found him. Judge Harrison read both documents carefully, making notes on his legal pad. Mr. Calder, I see you were present during the incident in question. Vince stood up in the gallery, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans that looked like he had slept in them. That kid needed to learn respect. His father's never around to teach him proper behavior. Sir, you're not a party to this proceeding. Please sit down. I'm just saying, someone has to provide discipline when the father is off playing soldier. Rena turned around and whispered harshly at Vince. Shut up and let him handle this. Judge Harrison observed the exchange with obvious disapproval. Mrs. Strickland, is Mr. Calder residing in your home? Sometimes. He helps with repairs and maintenance. And is he involved in disciplining your son? Rena hesitated, recognizing the trap. Only when necessary for safety and proper behavior. Your Honor, Jennifer said, we request immediate temporary custody and a restraining order preventing both Mrs. Strickland and Mr. Calder from unsupervised contact with a minor child. Judge Harrison made notes on his legal pad. Given the evidence presented, I'm granting temporary full custody to Mr. Strickland. Mrs. Strickland, you may have supervised visitation twice per week for 2 hours each session, pending a full custody hearing in 30 days. Mr. Calder is prohibited from any contact with the child during this period. Rena jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. You can't just take my son away based on one video. Ma'am, please sit down. He's trying to destroy my life. Lance never cared about Cole until now. This is all revenge because I found someone else. Ma'am, if you don't control yourself, I'll hold you in contempt. Vince grabbed Rena's arm and pulled her toward the exit. Come on, we'll fight this later. I want my son back, Rena shouted as Vince dragged her from the courtroom. This isn't over. Judge Harrison waited for silence. Mr. Strickland, you have temporary custody. Keep the child safe and ensure he attends his scheduled school activities. Yes, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, Lance watched Vince load Rena into his car. She was screaming at him, hitting his shoulder with her fists in uncontrolled rage. Vince grabbed her wrists and said something that made her stop struggling immediately. Lance memorized the license plate number and called Hector. They just left the courthouse. I need you to track their movements for the next few hours. Copy that. Cass is already in position with mobile surveillance. 3 days later, Lance received the information he needed. Hector's financial investigation had uncovered something valuable. Vince owed money to multiple gambling operations across Seattle and Tacoma. $43,000 in total debt spread across 6 different establishments. More importantly, Hector had traced the ownership of those debts. They had been sold to a collection agency that specialized in high-risk accounts. For the right price, those debts could be purchased by interested parties with legitimate business interests. Lance made the purchase through a shell company Hector had established using corporate law loopholes. $43,000 bought him complete control over Vince Calder's financial future. Next phase, Lance told Cass over their encrypted phones, "I need you to arrange a meeting." What kind of meeting? Vince thinks he owes money to small-time operators who might accept payment plans. "I want him to meet someone who represents serious financial interests with different collection methods." Cass understood immediately. "I know some people who can play that role convincingly. Former military, professional demeanor, capable of projecting exactly the right kind of threat." 2 nights later, Vince received a call at his favorite bar, O'Malley's Pub, on Pacific Avenue. The voice was polite but firm. His debts had been consolidated under new management, and immediate payment was required. A meeting was arranged for the following evening at a warehouse in the industrial district. Lance watched from Hector's surveillance van as Vince arrived at the designated location. The man looked nervous, checking over his shoulder repeatedly as he approached the building. His body language showed fear mixed with his usual aggressive posture. Inside, 2 of Cass's friends played their roles perfectly. Former Marine sergeants who now work private security, they projected exactly the right combination of professionalism and barely contained violence. Their suits were expensive, their mannerisms businesslike, their implications crystal clear. "Mr. Calder," the first man said, standing behind a metal desk in the empty warehouse, "you owe our organization $43,000. I thought this was separate debts to different people. I had payment arrangements. Things change. We bought your debts from the previous holders. Now you deal exclusively with us." Vince tried to negotiate. "Look, I can get you some of the money by next week. Maybe $5,000 to start. All of it. Tonight. I don't have that kind of cash available immediately. Then we have a problem that requires alternative solutions." Vince's natural aggressiveness kicked in, exactly as Lance had predicted. "Who do you think you're dealing with? I'm not some punk you can intimidate." The second man stepped forward. "Actually, that's exactly what you are." Vince swung first, which was exactly what Lance had planned for. The ex-Marines defended themselves with professional efficiency. Vince ended up on the concrete floor with a broken nose, 2 cracked ribs, and a dislocated shoulder. "This is what happens when you don't show proper respect," the first man said as Vince groaned on the ground. "Next time we visit, the consequences become more severe." They left Vince bleeding in the warehouse with instructions to have their money within 1 week. Lance and Hector monitored emergency radio frequencies from their surveillance position. Vince called 911 30 minutes later, claiming he had been mugged by unknown assailants. The ambulance took him to Tacoma General Hospital. "Target neutralized," Cass reported. "He'll be out of action for weeks." With Vince hospitalized, Lance turned his attention to Rena. Hector's financial investigation had revealed something promising. Irregular cash deposits in Rena's bank account that corresponded exactly with Vince's drug transactions. "She's laundering his money," Hector explained, showing Lance the parallel timelines on his computer screen. "Every time Vince makes a sale, Rena deposits the equivalent amount minus about 20%. The timing is too perfect to be coincidental. Can we prove criminal intent? Not yet, but if she keeps doing it, and if we can get her to admit knowledge of the source." Lance studied the transaction patterns spread across multiple monitors. "She's going to need money for Vince's medical bills. No insurance, and those emergency room visits are expensive. She'll have to access the laundered accounts to pay for his treatment. And when she does, we'll be documenting everything." Lance began monitoring Rena's movements using the surveillance network Cass had established. Without Vince to provide intimidation and street connections, she was struggling to maintain their income flow. Her credit cards were maxed out, and the hospital was demanding payment for Vince's treatment 2 weeks after Vince's mugging. Rena made a critical mistake. She met with one of Vince's former drug contacts in a restaurant parking lot on South Tacoma Way. Cass captured video of money changing hands, along with audio of Rena explaining that she needed to front the cash until Vince gets back on his feet. More importantly, Rena mentioned cleaning the money through my accounts like always and keeping the transaction records in case the feds start asking questions. Lance forwarded the evidence to DEA agent Patricia Novak, whom Hector had identified as heading a task force targeting financial crimes related to drug trafficking. The anonymous tip included bank statements, transaction logs, surveillance footage, and a recorded confession. Agent Novak opened a federal investigation the following week that Lance's phone rang at 7 in the morning. Rena's name appeared on the caller ID, which was unusual since she typically avoided contact during early hours. "Lance, I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About Cole. About us. I know I made mistakes, but I want to fix things." Lance had been expecting this call. With Vince sidelined and federal investigators asking questions about her finances, Rena was running out of options. Desperation made people careless. "What did you have in mind? Can we meet? Somewhere public, just to talk. I think we can work out an arrangement that benefits everyone." "Where?" "The coffee shop at Point Defiance Park. The one where we used to take Cole when he was little." Lance agreed to meet her that afternoon. Before leaving his apartment, he activated the recording app on his phone and clipped a wireless microphone to his shirt collar. Hector monitored the conversation from a surveillance van in the parking lot, ready to provide backup if the situation became dangerous. Rena was already seated when Lance arrived. She looked tired, stressed. Her usually perfect appearance showed cracks around the edges. Makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes looked like she had been wearing them for days. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down across from her. "What do you want, Rena?" "I want my son back. I want my life back." "You should have thought about that before you let your boyfriend abuse Cole." Vince was trying to help. "Cole needs discipline, structure. You're always at work, and I'm left dealing with everything alone." Lance sipped his coffee and waited. The recording device captured every word while Hector monitored from the parking lot. "The hospital bills are killing me," Rena continued. "Vince can't work with his injuries, and I'm struggling to keep up with everything." "What does that have to do with Cole?" "I need you to drop the custody case. If we share custody again, I can apply for dependent benefits through your military coverage." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm willing to get rid of Vince. He's more trouble than he's worth anyway." Lance leaned forward slightly. "How are you paying for things now?" "I have some savings." "From what?" "You haven't worked in 6 months." Rena shifted in her chair. "Vince had some money put aside." "Drug money?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I think you've been washing Vince's cash through your own accounts." Rena's eyes darted around the coffee shop, checking to see if anyone was listening. "Why would you say that?" "Because it's true, and because you're desperate enough to admit it if it means getting Cole back." She leaned across the table, lowering her voice. "Look, I may have helped Vince with some financial arrangements. Nothing major, just keeping the feds off our back. But I can stop all that if you give me another chance." "Define financial arrangements." "I take his cash and deposit it in my accounts, then transfer it to other places. It looked like legitimate income that way." "Money laundering." "It's not that serious. I was just helping my boyfriend manage his finances." Lance maintained his neutral expression while the recording device captured her confession. "How much money are we talking about?" "Maybe 50 or 60,000 over the past year. Nothing crazy." "And where did Vince get that money?" "He had various income sources. Some legal, some less legal." "Drug dealing?" Rena nodded slowly. "Sometimes, but I never touched the drugs themselves. I just handled the money side." Lance's phone continued recording every word. In the surveillance van, Hector was capturing the conversation through multiple devices while maintaining watch for potential threats. "So you admit to money laundering drug proceeds?" "I admit to helping someone I cared about. And I'm willing to stop if it means getting my son back." "What makes you think I'd trust you with Cole after everything that happened?" "Because I'm his mother. Because kids need their mothers, no matter what mistakes they've made." Lance finished his coffee. "I'll think about it." "Lance, please. I'm drowning here. The bills, the investigators asking questions about my accounts, Vince being useless. I need help." "Investigators?" "Some federal agents came by asking about large cash deposits. I told them I had savings from previous jobs, but they seemed suspicious." Lance stood up. "I'll be in touch. Promise me you'll consider it. For Cole's sake." I said I'll think about it. Lance left the coffee shop with everything he needed. Rena had confessed to money laundering, admitted knowledge of Vince's drug dealing, and confirmed that federal agents were already investigating her accounts. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. Lance forwarded the recorded confession to Agent Novak along with all supporting evidence Hector had compiled over the previous months. Bank statements showing the money laundering pattern. Surveillance video of drug transactions. Financial records proving the connection between Vince's sales and Rena's deposits. Photographic evidence of criminal activity. Audio recordings of incriminating conversations. The DEA moved quickly. Federal prosecutors loved cases with clear evidence and recorded confessions. The evidence package was overwhelming, leaving no room for reasonable doubt. Within a week, arrest warrants were issued for both Rena Strickland and Vince Calder. The raids happened at dawn on a Tuesday morning. Lance was drinking coffee at his apartment when Hector called. It's happening. Multiple units moving on both targets simultaneously. Lance drove to a position where he could observe Rena's house from a safe distance. Federal agents surrounded the property with tactical precision. Armored vehicles blocked the street, while agents positioned themselves at every exit point. Federal agents. Search warrant. The voice boomed through a bullhorn, echoing off nearby houses. The front door exploded inward under the impact of a battering ram. Agents poured through the opening in coordinated waves. Lance counted 12 agents, all armed, all moving with the practiced efficiency of a well-trained tactical unit. 3 minutes later, they brought Rena out in handcuffs. She wore pajamas and no makeup. Her perfect facade had completely crumbled, revealing the desperation and fear underneath. She screamed at the agents, demanding to know what charges they were filing. Money laundering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and child endangerment. The lead agent announced for the gathered neighbors and media that a second team arrested Vince at his apartment across town. Still recovering from his injuries, he offered no resistance when agents broke down his door. The man who had terrorized an 8-year-old boy was now too weak and frightened to fight back. Lance watched the arrest vehicles drive away, then called his lawyer. Jennifer, the federal case is moving forward. When can we file for permanent custody? I'll have the paperwork ready this afternoon. With federal charges pending, the family court will fast-track our petition. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Lance didn't attend, but Hector provided daily updates on the proceedings. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, built on months of careful evidence gathering and documentation. Recorded confessions, financial evidence, surveillance video, and witness testimony created an airtight conviction. The defense attorneys had no effective strategy against such comprehensive evidence that Rena's defense attorney tried to argue that she was manipulated by Vince, that she didn't understand the seriousness of her actions. The jury didn't buy it. Her recorded confession had been too detailed, too knowing, too clearly indicating criminal intent. Vince attempted to plea bargain by offering information about his suppliers and distribution network. The prosecution wasn't interested. They had enough evidence to convict both defendants without needing cooperation deals. The verdicts came back guilty on all counts for both defendants. Judge Patricia Williamson delivered the sentences on a Friday afternoon. Lance listened to the proceedings through Hector's remote audio feed while sitting in his apartment. Mrs. Strickland, you have been convicted of money laundering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and child endangerment. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Mr. Calder, you have been convicted of distribution of controlled substances, assault, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 6 years. Both defendants were remanded to federal custody immediately. Lance ended the audio feed and called his lawyer. What's our status on the custody case? With the criminal convictions, we can file for termination of parental rights. Rena won't be eligible for release until Cole is 16. The court will almost certainly grant permanent sole custody. That evening, Lance, Cass, and Hector met at the cabin to close out Operation Cold Justice. Cass had brought a bottle of bourbon to mark the occasion, something aged enough to match the significance of their success. To storms, she said, raising her glass. The kind we start, not the kind we weather. They drank in silence. 3 veterans who had executed a perfect mission with precision and complete success. Any regrets? Hector asked after they had finished their drinks. Lance thought about Rena screaming as the federal agents loaded her into the transport vehicle. About Vince bleeding on the warehouse floor, broken and helpless. About the systematic destruction of 2 lives that had threatened his son. None, he said without hesitation. 6 months later, Lance took Cole to the annual military parade at Joint Base Lewis McChord. The boy had been living full-time with his father since the arrests, and the transition had been smooth. Cole's analytical nature thrived in the structured environment Lance provided, with clear rules, consistent expectations, and respect for intelligence. They found seats near the parade route as tanks and military vehicles rolled past in perfect formation. Cole asked detailed questions about each piece of equipment, wanting to understand the engineering principles and tactical applications. "Dad, that's the drone you worked on, isn't it?" Cole pointed at a reconnaissance unit passing by. "One of them. I designed the targeting system. The one that can track multiple targets simultaneously." Lance smiled. His son's mind absorbed technical details like a sponge, processing complex information and asking follow-up questions that showed real understanding. "That's right. It can maintain locks on up to 12 separate targets while conducting surveillance operations. And it never misses its intended target. It's very accurate when properly deployed by competent operators." Cole watched the next formation of vehicles pass by, tanks rolling in precise lines while soldiers marched alongside. "Dad, yeah, buddy, you always win, don't you?" Lance looked down at his son. Cole's analytical nature, the trait that had triggered Vince's violence, was now focused on understanding his father's work and methods. The boy was learning valuable lessons about planning, preparation, and the application of superior force. "Only when it matters," Lance replied. Cole nodded, satisfied with the answer. He understood more than most 8-year-olds, and Lance was counting on that intelligence to serve his son well in the years ahead. The parade continued, tanks rolling past in perfect formation. Lance had taught his son that some battles required precision, patience, and the willingness to deploy overwhelming force when necessary. Cole would remember these lessons. The mission was complete. The targets had been neutralized permanently. The primary asset was secure. Operation Cold Justice was closed.